The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, they had looked up at the night sky and wondered what waited for them in the darkness between worlds. Now in the year 2347, they finally knew the answer. The universe was full of life. It was also full of those who believed they had the right to rule it. Admiral Park. Doan stood alone on the observation deck of the TSS Indomitable. The massive warship drifted silently through the void, its hull scarred from 100 battles. Through the reinforced glass, he could see the blue and green marble of Kestrel IV spinning slowly below. 2 million humans lived on that world. Farmers, teachers, children, they had come here seeking a new life. Far from the crowded cities of Earth, they did not know what was coming for them. The door behind him opened with a soft hiss. Fleet Commander Kim Yuna stepped onto the deck, her boots clicking against the metal floor. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and silver hair cut short in the military style. She had served under Doan for 15 years. In all that time, she had never seen him look so tired. "The transmission came through," she said quietly. "The council has made their decision." Doan did not turn around. "Read it to me." Yuna activated her datapad and began to read. The words were cold and formal, written in the language of bureaucrats who had never known fear. The Galactic Council, in its infinite wisdom, had declared humanity's expansion into the border systems to be illegal. The Terran Protectorate was ordered to withdraw from 4-star systems within 30 standard days. Failure to comply would result in what they called corrective action. When she finished, silence filled the observation deck. "Corrective action," Doan repeated softly. "That is what they call it when they burn cities and enslave populations." "Corrective action, sir. What do we do?" Doan finally turned to face her. His face was weathered and lined, the face of a man who had spent his life among the stars. But his eyes burned with something fierce and unyielding. "We go to New Geneva," he said. "The Chancellor needs to hear this himself." 3 days later, the leaders of humanity gathered in the great hall of the Terran capital. New Geneva had been built on the ruins of the old city, rising from the ashes of the last war like a promise of better days. Now, that promise was being threatened. Chancellor Beek Sunho sat at the head of the long table, listening as Admiral Doan presented the council's ultimatum. Sunho was not a tall man, but he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had earned his position through decades of service. He had been born in the asteroid mines of Titan, the son of workers who had never seen Earth's sky. He knew what it meant to fight for survival. Beside him sat Defense Minister Cho Hanna. She was younger than most of the council, barely 50 years old, but her mind was sharp as a blade. Her family had been among the first generation born outside the Sol system. To her, Earth was a distant memory, a place of stories and old photographs. The stars were her home. "They give us 30 days, Sunho said when Dohan finished speaking. "And then what?" "They come with their fleets and their soldiers, and they take what they want." "That is their way," Doan replied. "They have done it 100 times before. 1,000 times. They find a young species, they make demands, and when those demands are refused, they crush them. It is how they have maintained their power for 10,000 years. Cho Hanna leaned forward. "How many ships do they have?" "The Council commands over 50,000 warships across their combined fleets. If they choose to move against us with their full strength, we cannot stop them." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the table, faces grew pale. Some of the council members looked down at their hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. But Chancellor Sunho did not look away. He stared at the holographic map floating above the table, showing the tiny cluster of stars that humanity called home. 17 systems, 43 colonies, 12 billion souls. "They expect us to surrender," he said slowly. "They expect us to bow our heads and accept their chains. That is what every other species has done. That is what they believe we will do." "Sir," one of the council members spoke up, his voice trembling. "Perhaps we should consider negotiation. If we give them the border systems, perhaps they will leave us in peace." Sunho turned to look at the man. His gaze was not angry, but it was not kind either. "And then what? Next year, they demand more systems. The year after that, they demand our shipyards, our factories, Our children for their labor camps? That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. You give them one thing, and they take everything. He stood up from his chair, and the room fell silent. My grandfather died in the last war, Sun Ho continued. He fought in the streets of Seoul when the bombs were falling and the world was burning. Do you know what he told my father before he died? He said that freedom is not given. It is taken. It is held. It is defended with blood and fire and the bones of those who refuse to kneel. He walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Millions of lights glittered in the darkness, each one representing a life, a family, a dream. I will not kneel, he said. I will not surrender our future to those who see us as nothing more than insects to be crushed. If they want war, then war they shall have. He turned back to face the council. Prepare the broadcast. I will address the galaxy myself. 1 hour later, Chancellor Beek Sunho's voice echoed across every frequency, in every language known to the stars. His words were simple and clear, spoken without fear or hesitation. The Terran Protectorate recognizes no authority beyond its own sovereignty. Our borders are not suggestions. They are promises. Cross them and discover what humanity is willing to do to protect its own. We did not come to the stars to become slaves. We came to be free, and we will remain free no matter the cost. In the great halls of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Orin of the Vel Hegemony listened to the broadcast with cold amusement. He was ancient, even by the standards of his long-lived species, and he had seen many young races rise and fall. They all said the same things. They all made the same promises, and they all broke in the end. Prepare the pacification fleet, he ordered calmly. It is time to teach these humans their place. He did not know it then, but those words would be his greatest mistake. The combined pacification fleet arrived in the Kestrel system on a cold morning in March. 400 warships from 6 different species, their hulls painted in the colors of the Galactic Council. They came expecting an easy victory. They came expecting fear and surrender. They found something else entirely. Admiral Park Doan watched them emerge from hyperspace on the tactical display of the Indomitable. Red dots appeared one after another, filling the screen like drops of blood. His bridge crew worked in tense silence, their fingers moving across consoles, their eyes fixed on their stations. 412 confirmed contacts. Lieutenant Yoon Taiwan reported from the tactical station. He was young, barely 30 years old, with the calm voice of someone who had trained for this moment his entire life. They are forming a standard assault formation. Estimated time to engagement range for hours. Doan nodded slowly. And our forces? 63 ships, sir. 12 heavy cruisers. 24 destroyers. 27 frigates. Plus the civilian defense platforms around Kestrel 4. The numbers were terrible. 6-to-1 odds, perhaps worse, when accounting for the superior size and firepower of the Council vessels. Any reasonable commander would have ordered a retreat. Any reasonable commander would have tried to save what ships he could. But Doan was not reasonable. He was human. Signal all ships, he said quietly. Execute Operation Falling Star. Across the fleet, captains received the order and understood what it meant. This was the plan they had trained for. The strategy they had developed over decades of careful study. The Council believed they were coming to fight a primitive species that had only recently discovered space travel. They did not know that humanity had been watching them for 200 years. Learning their tactics. Studying their weaknesses, the Terran fleet did not advance to meet the enemy. Instead, they scattered. Ships powered down their engines and drifted into the massive asteroid belt that surrounded the outer planets of the Kestrel system. Within an hour, the entire human fleet had vanished from Council sensors. On the bridge of the Vel flagship, Eternal Dominion, Fleet Commander Roth frowned at his displays. The human ships had simply disappeared. Find them, he ordered. They cannot have gone far. His sensor officers worked frantically, but the asteroid belt was vast and cluttered with debris. The rocks confused their instruments, creating thousands of false signals. It would take days to search the entire field. Roth was not patient. Advance to the planet, he commanded. If they will not come to us, we will take their colony and force them to respond. The Council fleet moved forward in a tight formation, their weapons charged and ready. They passed through the outer edge of the asteroid belt without incident. Then they reached the middle zone. The first mine detonated against the hull of a Koroth destroyer. The explosion was small, almost insignificant against the massive ship, but it was not alone. A second mine struck. Then a third. Then 100. Lieutenant Commander Anwanjin had spent 3 months placing those mines. He had flown his small stealth ship through the asteroid belt, night after night, hiding Asive charges in the shadows of rocks, programming them to activate when they detected Council engine signatures. Now, from his hiding place behind a mountain-sized asteroid, he watched his work come to life. Fire, he whispered to himself. Burn. The Council formation broke apart as ships tried to evade the mines. Some succeeded. Many did not. Explosions lit up the darkness of space like a string of deadly fireworks, and then the Terran. Fleet struck. Captain Li Minji commanded the carrier Sovereign from the heart of the chaos. Her ship had been hiding behind a massive ice asteroid, its engines cold, its systems running on minimal power. Now she brought it to life with a single command. Launch all fighters, she ordered. Target their command ships. 300 drone fighters poured from the Sovereign's launch bays. They were small and fast, designed for exactly this kind of close-range combat. Each one carried enough firepower to cripple a frigate or destroy a destroyer's engines. Together, they were a swarm of death. The Council point defense systems tried to track them, but there were too many targets moving too fast. Drones slipped through the gaps in their fire, delivering their payloads with mechanical precision. A Uran cruiser lost its main engines. A Vel battleship suffered a catastrophic reactor breach. A Koroth carrier found itself spinning helplessly as its control systems were destroyed. Lieutenant Yun Taiwan coordinated the attack from the Indomitable's tactical center. His voice remained calm as he directed ships and fighters, calling out targets and opportunities. He had studied the Council fleets for years, learning their weaknesses and blind spots. Now he used that knowledge without mercy. Destroyer Group Beta, engage the enemy left flank. Frigate Squadron Delta, target those troop transports. Do not let them reach the planet. Admiral Doan watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The Council had expected to find sheep. They had found wolves. Fleet Commander Roth stared at his displays in disbelief. His fleet was dying around him. Ships that had served the Council for centuries were breaking apart under the human assault. And still the enemy came, appearing from the asteroids like ghosts, striking and vanishing before his guns could find them. How is this possible? He demanded. They are primitives. They should not be able to do this. No one had an answer for him. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the combined pacification fleet had been shattered. 212 Council ships had been destroyed. Another 143 had surrendered or been captured. The survivors fled into hyperspace, their hulls burning, their crews screaming. Human losses were 14 ships and 8,000 personnel. Each death was a tragedy. Each name would be remembered. Admiral Doan stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and looked out at the field of debris that had once been an enemy fleet. Pieces of metal drifted through the void, some still glowing from the fires that had consumed them. Bodies floated among the wreckage, aliens and humans alike, united in death. Open a channel to the retreating ships, he ordered quietly. When the channel was ready, he spoke. His voice was tired but steady. This is Admiral Park Doan of the Terran Protectorate. We did not ask for this battle. You brought it to our door. We defended our homes, our families, our right to exist. That is all. We do not wish to continue this war. But if you return, if you threaten our people again, we will meet you with the same fury. Go home. Tell your masters what happened here. Tell them that humanity will not be conquered. Tell them that we are not afraid. He paused, looking out at the stars, and tell them not to come back. On the Council homeworld, Ambassador Oren watched the recordings of the battle in his private chambers. He had seen many wars in his long life. He had witnessed the fall of empires and the extinction of species. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans had not just won. They had humiliated the Council. They had taken the greatest military force ever sent against a single species and torn it apart. For the first time in centuries, Oren felt something cold settle in his chest. Something he had almost forgotten. Fear the galaxy would never be the same. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 10,000 years. Its walls were carved from the bones of a dead moon, and its ceiling showed the stars of 100 conquered systems. Here, the 12 elder species had ruled the galaxy with absolute power. Here, they had decided the fate of civilizations with a single vote. Now, for the first time in living memory, that chamber echoed with the sound of fear. High Arbiter Senna of the Korath Dominion slammed his massive fist against the table. He was 7 feet tall, covered in thick scales the color of dried blood, and his voice shook the walls when he spoke.
Ow!
"This is unacceptable," he roared. "We sent 400 ships, 400 of our finest vessels. And these humans, these insects, destroyed them in a single day. This cannot stand. We must send everything, crush them before they grow stronger." Other voices rose in agreement. The Vel demanded revenge. The Korath demanded blood. The lesser species nodded along, too afraid to disagree. But not everyone shared their fury. Observer Talum of the Uran Collective sat quietly in his seat, his silver eyes watching the chaos around him. The Uran were scholars, not warriors. They had joined the council, not for conquest, but for knowledge. And Talum knew things that the others had ignored. "May I speak?" he asked softly. The chamber fell silent. Talum rarely spoke in these meetings. When he did, it was usually worth hearing. "You call these humans insects?" he continued. "You say they should be crushed. But have any of you actually studied their history? Have any of you read the reports our observers have sent back over the past 2 centuries? Senna made a sound of disgust. "What is there to study? They are a young species, primitive, weak." "No," Talum said. "They are not." He activated a holographic display, and images began to appear in the air above the council table. Cities burning, soldiers charging across muddy fields, ships sinking in dark waters, mushroom clouds rising over shattered landscapes. "This is their history," Talum explained. "They have been fighting since before they could write. They killed each other over land, over resources, over ideas. They invented weapons that could destroy entire cities. They created plagues that wiped out millions. They burned their own world nearly to ash, and then they rebuilt it." The images changed, showing something different now. Humans working together to build great structures. Humans launching themselves into space on pillars of fire. Humans standing on the surface of alien worlds, planting flags in foreign soil. And then something changed. Talum continued. They stopped fighting each other. They united. For the first time in their entire existence, they turned their fury outward instead of inward. Do you understand what that means? Everything they once used to destroy themselves, they now use to protect themselves. And they are very, very good at destruction. Silence filled the chamber. Ambassador Oren finally spoke, his voice heavy with reluctant respect. "What do you suggest we do?" "I suggest we be very careful," Talum replied. "Because if we push them too hard, they will not stop. They will not surrender. They will fight until there is nothing left. Not of them. Not of us. Of anyone, but Sina would not listen. Neither would the others. Pride was stronger than wisdom. The council voted to assemble the Grand Armada far across the galaxy. On the colony world of Havenfall, a different kind of battle was being fought. Namsora had been a schoolteacher before the war. She had spent 20 years teaching children to read, to count, to dream of better futures. Now she stood in the central plaza of Havenfall City, organizing the evacuation of 50,000 civilians. "Keep moving," she called out, her voice steady, despite the fear in her heart. "Families stay together. Children, hold your parents' hands. The transports are waiting." Round her, chaos threatened to consume everything. People pushed and shoved, desperate to reach the ships that would carry them to safety. Mothers screamed for lost children. Old men stumbled and fell. Young soldiers tried to maintain order, their faces pale with exhaustion. A little girl stood alone near the fountain, crying. She could not have been more than 5 years old. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she clutched a small stuffed animal to her chest. I knelt down beside her. "Hello, little one. What is your name?" "Eugene," the girl whispered. "I cannot find my mother." "We'll find her together," Sora promised. She took the girl's hand gently. "Do you see that big ship over there? The one with the blue lights? Your mother is probably looking for you there. Let us go see." She led the child through the crowd, her heart breaking with every step. How many children like this were there across human space? How many families were being torn apart by this war they had never asked for? On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Park Doan reviewed the intelligence reports that Commander Shin Dong-ho had brought him. Dong-ho was the head of Terran intelligence, a quiet man with sharp eyes who saw things others missed. "The Council is gathering their forces," Dong-ho explained. "Every ship, every soldier, every weapon they have. They are calling it the Grand Armada. Our best estimates put their numbers at nearly 2,000 warships." Doan absorbed this information in silence. 2,000 ships. 6 times what they had faced at Kestrel. How long do we have? 3 months, maybe 4. They need time to gather their forces from. Across the galaxy, Fleet Commander Kim Yuna stood nearby, her arms crossed. "We cannot win a straight fight against those numbers. Even with our tactics, even with our technology, we simply do not have enough ships."
No.
Doan agreed. "We cannot." He turned to look at the star map on the wall. 17 systems, 43 colonies, 12 billion people counting on him to keep them safe. "But we do not need to win," he continued slowly. "We just need to make them bleed. Make them pay such a price for every inch of space that they decide it is not worth the cost." "The threshold," Yuna said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Doan nodded. "The threshold." It was a narrow passage between 2 neutron stars, the only stable hyperspace route into human territory. Ships that tried to go around would spend months in transit. Ships that came through the threshold would have to face whatever was waiting for them on the other side. "We will make our stand there," Doan declared. "Every ship we have, every weapon, every soldier, every person willing to fight. We will turn that passage into a graveyard." In the capital, Chancellor Baek Sunho met with his war council one final time. Defense Minister Cho Hanna presented the plans, the numbers, the terrible odds they faced. "We are asking our people to die," Sunho said quietly when she finished. "We are asking them to sacrifice everything for a chance at survival." "Yes," Cho Hanna replied simply. "We are." Sunho looked at the faces around the table. Old soldiers and young officers. Scientists and politicians, people who had devoted their lives to building a better future for humanity. "Then let us give them something worth dying for," he said. "Let us show the galaxy what it means to be human." He stood and addressed them all. "We did not choose this war, but we will end it. Not through surrender, not through compromise. Through courage, through sacrifice, through the unbreakable will of 12 billion people who refuse to kneel, the Council believes they can break us. Let us prove them wrong." Across human space, the word went out. Soldiers reported to their ships. Civilians volunteered for service. Factories worked day and night, building weapons and supplies. Everyone understood what was coming, and everyone understood what was at stake. The final battle was coming. Humanity would face it together. The Grand Armada emerged from hyperspace like a wave of death. 1,847 warships, drawn from every corner of the Galactic Council's territory. The largest military force ever assembled in the history of known space. Their weapons could crack planets. Their soldiers numbered in the millions. They had come to end humanity once and for all. Admiral Park Doan watched them arrive from the bridge of the Indomitable. The tactical display turned red as enemy contacts appeared, filling the screen until it seemed there was no empty space left. Behind him, his bridge crew worked in grim silence. They knew the numbers. They knew what they were facing. They did not run. How many? Fleet Commander Kim Yuna asked quietly. All of them, Do-won replied. They brought everything. The Terran combined fleet waited at the threshold. The narrow passage between two neutron stars that served as the gateway to human space. 312 ships against nearly 2,000. The math was simple. The math was terrible, but the threshold was not empty space. For 3 months, human engineers had worked without rest, building defenses throughout the passage. Weapon platforms hidden among the gravitational eddies. Minefields floating in the dark. Sensor jammers that would blind enemy targeting systems. If the Council wanted to reach human space, they would have to fight for every kilometer. Captain Lee Minji stood on the bridge of the carrier Sovereign, watching the enemy fleet form up for their assault. Her grandfather had been a fighter pilot in the last war on Earth, back when humanity still fought among themselves. He had taught her many things before he died. How to fly, how to fight, how to face death without fear. All pilots to stations, she ordered calmly. We launch in 10 minutes. Colonel Zhang Yunji checked her weapons one last time in the Marine staging area of the assault ship Vengeance. She had spent 20 years in the Terran Marines, fighting pirates and rebels, and anyone else who threatened human colonies. This was different. This was the fight that would decide everything. Her soldiers waited around her, her faces young and old, scared and determined. Some of them would not survive the next few hours. She knew that. They knew that. Listen up, she called out, her voice carrying across the room. Today we fight for more than ourselves. We fight for everyone who could not be here. For the children on Havenfall. For the families on Kestrel. For every human being in this galaxy who just wants to live in peace. The Council thinks they can take that from us. Let us show them how wrong they are. The first wave of Council ships entered the threshold. They died screaming. Minefields activated in sequence, tearing through their formation. Hidden weapons platforms opened fire, targeting engines and bridges and reactor cores. The narrow passage became a killing ground. It's filled with fire and debris and the burning hulls of dying ships. But the Council had numbers on their side. For every ship that fell, 2 more took its place. They pushed forward through the carnage, accepting losses that would have broken any other force. Their commanders screamed orders, driving their crews onward with threats and promises in pure, desperate fury. Admiral. Do-won watched the enemy advance and knew it was time. All ships, he commanded. Engage. The Terran fleet surged forward to meet them. Lieutenant Commander An Woon-jin piloted the destroyer Fury into the heart of the enemy formation. His ship was small and fast, designed for exactly this kind of close-range combat. He weaved between the massive Council warships, his weapons firing constantly, targeting weak points and vulnerable systems. Stay together, he called to his crew. Keep moving. Do not give them a clean shot. A Vel cruiser loomed in front of him, its guns tracking his position. Wan-jin threw his ship into a sharp dive, feeling the hull groan under the stress. Energy beams passed centimeters above his bridge, close enough to scorch the paint. He came up behind the cruiser and fired everything he had into its engines. The massive ship shuddered and began to drift, its propulsion systems destroyed. 1 down, he said grimly. 1,000 to go. Captain Minji's carrier group held the left flank of the human formation. Her drones filled the space around her, a swarm of death that struck again and again at the enemy fleet. But the Council had learned from their defeat at Kestrel. They had adjusted their tactics, improved their point defenses. One by one, her drones were being destroyed. How many do we have left? She asked. 47%, her tactical officer reported. We are losing them faster than we can replace them. Minji did not hesitate. Prepare the ship for direct combat. If we cannot win with our drones, we will win with our guns. The Sovereign was never designed for close-range fighting. It was a carrier, meant to stay back and launch fighters. But Mingi drove it forward anyway, its heavy weapons blazing against the enemy line. Colonel Youngji led her Marines in boarding action after boarding action. They cut through airlock doors, fought hand-to-hand in cramped corridors, took control of enemy ships 1 deck at a time. 3 Council dreadnoughts fell to her soldiers, their crews killed or captured, Their weapons turned against their former allies. The battle stretched on for hours. Night became day again. Ships exploded in silent fireballs. Bodies drifted among the wreckage. The threshold filled with so much debris that sensors became nearly useless. And still both sides fought on. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Dewan directed the defense with cold precision. He had not slept in 3 days. He had not eaten in 2. His uniform was stained with sweat and blood from a wound he barely remembered receiving. A torpedo struck the Indomitable's port side, and the ship shook violently. Half the bridge crew was thrown from their stations. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. Somewhere an alarm began to wail. "Damage report," Dewan demanded. "Decks 7 through 12 are breached," someone reported. "We have lost main power to the forward weapons. Casualties are ... significant." Una appeared at his side, a cut on her forehead bleeding freely. "Sir, we need to transfer to the auxiliary bridge." Dewan nodded. He took one last look at the tactical display, then turned and followed her from the burning bridge. The auxiliary bridge was smaller, cramped, filled with emergency equipment and backup systems, but it had power and weapons and communication. That was enough. Lieutenant Commander Wanjin's voice crackled over the communicator. "Admiral, the Vel flagship is making a run for the passage. If they break through, they will have a clear path to the colonies." Dewan checked the display. The Fury was the closest ship to the enemy flagship, but it had taken severe damage. Its engines were failing. Its weapons were nearly depleted. "Wanjin," he said slowly, "can you stop them?" There was a long pause. When Wanjin spoke again, his voice was calm. "Can try, sir. It has been an honor serving with you." The Fury turned toward the Vel flagship and accelerated. It was not heading to attack. It was heading to ram. Wanjin's final transmission echoed across the fleet. "For humanity. For everyone we love. Remember us." The Fury struck the flagship at full speed. Both ships disappeared in a ball of fire that outshone the neutron stars themselves. The battle raged on. The Sovereign was finally destroyed, its hull torn ape. Art by concentrated fire. Captain Minji's last transmission was simple and proud. "Tell my family I was still flying." But slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The Council fleet, despite its overwhelming numbers, could not advance. The narrow passage of the threshold negated their advantage, forcing them to attack in small groups that the humans could handle. The defenses held. The line did not break. 72 hours after it began, the Battle of the Threshold ended. The Grand Armada was broken. Over 1,000 Council ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors retreated in disorder, their spirits shattered, confidence destroyed. Human losses were 204 ships, 400,000 personnel. Names that would be carved into monuments across human space. Admiral Dewan, exhausted beyond words, broadcast a final message to the galaxy. "We did not want this war. We wanted only to live in peace. But you gave us no choice. So hear me now. We will not stop. We will not break. For every one of us you kill, 10 more will rise. That is the truth of humanity. We endure. We adapt. We overcome. And we never, ever forget." The galaxy listened in silence. Everything had changed. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Where once the 12 elder species had spoken with one voice, now there was only division and despair. The seats of the Vel hegemony sat half empty, their representatives unwilling to meet the eyes of their former allies. The Korath Dominion had withdrawn its diplomats entirely, their pride shattered beyond repair. High Arbiter Cinna was dead, killed when his flagship was destroyed at the threshold. Many others had joined him. The flower of Council military power built over 10,000 years. It's been cut down in 3 days by a species they had called Primitive Observer. Talum of the Uran Collective rose to address the assembly. His silver eyes swept across the broken remnants of galactic authority. "I warned you," he said simply. "I told you what they were. You did not listen. No one argued with him. There was nothing left to argue about. The Terran Collective hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, Talum announced. We will not participate in any further actions against the Terran Protectorate. If you wish to destroy yourselves, that is your choice. We choose differently. He walked out of the chamber without looking back. Within hours, 3 other species followed. The 1,000-year alliance was crumbling, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Ambassador Oren sat alone in his private quarters, staring at the wall. He was old, older than most of his kind, and he had seen many things in his long life, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans had done more than win a battle. They had broken the idea of council superiority. They had proven that the elder species could be defeated. Their power was not absolute. That the galaxy could be different. Everything he had believed was wrong. A message arrived from his government. The Vel hegemony was facing internal rebellion. Colonies that had been quiet for centuries were demanding independence. Military units were refusing orders. The great machine of empire was grinding to a halt. And somewhere on the far side of the galaxy, 12 billion humans were still standing. Oren made a decision. The space station hung in neutral territory, far from any claimed system. It was old and worn, built centuries ago for meetings that no one remembered. Now it served as the site of something unprecedented. Chancellor Beek Sunho arrived aboard a single transport ship. He was accompanied only by a small guard detail and Defense Minister Cho Hanna. The Terran Protectorate did not need to show force. Their victory had spoken louder than any fleet. Ambassador Oren was waiting for them in the station's central chamber. He looked different than Sunho had imagined. Smaller somehow. Less certain. "Thank you for coming," Oren said, and his voice held no arrogance, no condescension. "Just wariness. I was curious," Sunho replied. "After everything your people have done, you asked for a meeting. I wanted to know why." Oren gestured to the seats arranged around the chamber. When they were settled, he spoke. "We underestimated you," he began. "That is obvious now. But it was more than that. We did not understand what you were. We saw a young species, barely a few centuries old, and we assumed you would be like all the others. Weak, fearful, easy to control." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We were wrong. You are nothing like the others. You have a fire in you that we have never seen. A willingness to sacrifice, to endure, to keep fighting, even when all hope seems lost. It is terrifying and beautiful." Sunho listened without expression. "Your words are kind, Ambassador. But words did not destroy your fleet. Actions did." "Yes," Oren agreed. "And that is why I am here. Not to apologize, though I do apologize. Not to explain, though I could try. I am here because I believe we can build something better. Something that does not require conquest and domination. Something that respects the sovereignty of all peoples, including yours." Cho Hanna leaned forward. "You speak of peace. But your council has been making war for 10,000 years. Why should we believe you have changed?" "Because we have no choice," Oren answered honestly. "The council is falling apart. The Terran have left. Others are following. The old order is dying. The only question is what will replace it." He looked directly at Sunho. "I would rather build the new order with you than against you." The negotiations took 3 months. They were difficult, contentious, filled with anger and mistrust on both sides. Humanity had not forgotten the ships lost at the threshold. They had not forgotten the friends and family who had died defending their homes. But in the end, an agreement was reached. The Treaty of New Dawn recognized the Terran Protectorate as a sovereign power with full rights and standing in galactic affairs. The border systems that the Council had claimed were acknowledged as human territory. All demands for humanity to withdraw or submit were permanently withdrawn in exchange. Humanity agreed to establish diplomatic relations with those Council species that desired them. Trade routes were opened. Cultural exchanges began. The galaxy took its first hesitant steps toward a new kind of relationship. Defense Minister Cho Hanna was appointed as the first ambassador to the Terran Collective. She had spent her life preparing for war. Now she would spend it building peace. Admiral Park Doan retired from active service. The wounds he had received at the threshold, both physical and spiritual, never fully healed. But he found a new purpose at the Terran Naval Academy, teaching the next generation the lessons he had learned. War is not glorious, he told his students on the first day of every term. It is terrible. It takes the best of us and throws them away. But sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes we must fight to protect what we love. When that day comes, fight with everything you have. And when it is over, remember those who stood beside you. Remember what they gave so that others might live. On the colony world of Havenfall, Nam Sora returned to teaching. Her students were the children who had survived the evacuation, the ones she had guided onto transport ships while bombs fell in the distance. They were different now, older, wiser, marked by experiences no child should have to endure. But they were alive. They were learning. They were building the future that their parents had fought to protect. Across human space, monuments rose to honor the fallen. On Kestrel 4, a statue of a single soldier stood in the central plaza, their face turned toward the stars. The inscription at the base was simple. We held the line. On Earth itself, in the rebuilt city of Sol, a memorial garden was planted with flowers from every human colony. 12 billion names were carved into walls of black marble, representing every person who had lived and worked and dreamed during the war years. At the center of the garden stood a fountain, its waters catching the sunlight and scattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see it. Even aliens, species who had once wanted humanity destroyed, traveled to Earth to understand what they had faced. They walked through the garden in silence, reading the names, looking at the faces in the photographs. They left changed. In the great archives of the Uran Collective, Observer Talum completed his report on humanity. It was the most comprehensive study ever conducted on a single species. Drawing on 2 centuries of observation and the recent war itself, the final entry read simply, Humanity. Classification, Elder Species. Status, Do not provoke. They will not surrender. They will not break. They will fight until nothing remains, and they will win. The report was distributed to every civilized world in the galaxy. It became required reading for diplomats and military officers alike, on the anniversary of the Battle of the Threshold. Chancellor Sunho addressed the people of the Terran Protectorate one final time. He was an old man now, worn by years of service and struggle. But his voice was still strong, and his eyes still burned with the same fire that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. We have survived, he said. We have proven that we belong among the stars. But our journey is not over. It has only begun. The universe is vast and full of wonders we have not yet imagined. There are worlds to explore, mysteries to solve, futures to build. And we will face them together, as we have faced everything else. Not as conquerors, not as victims, but as humans. Flawed, complicated, endlessly surprising humans who refuse to give up, no matter the odds. He smiled, and for a moment, he looked almost young again. The galaxy thought they knew what we were. They were wrong. Let us show them what we can become. The applause lasted for a very long time, and somewhere, among the distant stars, a new chapter in human history was beginning.